Hello, welcome to another edition of Let the Quran Speak. Peace be with you and the mercy and blessings of God. I'm Shabir Ali and I'll be your host for this episode. In this episode of Let the Quran Speak, we'll be speaking with Dr. Tariq Ramadan on his new book, Radical Reform. And we'll be looking at the much disputed question of ijtihad. How can it be done and by whom? And finally, women's rights in Islam, according to Dr. Tariq Ramadan. And before we close the show, we'll be looking at some of the most common questions we receive from you, our viewers. So, to turn to my guest, Dr. Tariq Ramadan is Professor of Islamic Studies. He's currently teaching at the Faculty of Theology at Oxford University. He's also a visiting professor at Erasmus University in the Netherlands. And if I continue, we'll just finish the show just looking at his credentials. But let's look at the man. Dr. Ramadan, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thanks for coming and being on the show.
Thank you for your invitation.
And welcome to Canada.
Thank you.
Now, you've been on the whirlwind tour from Victoria all the way up to Ottawa, passing through Toronto and Kingston. How's your experience in Canada?
No, I like the country. I came many times before, so it's not the first time. And I think that we have a lot to learn from what is happening in Canada. And this relationship between, the French-speaking area, Quebec, and the English, Anglo-Saxon way of looking at things. So I think that it's a very interesting country. And then also for us, coming from Europe or the Islamic world, I think it's important to be connected to your reality.
You yourself are well connected. You speak several languages. You speak English, French, Arabic, of course.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about your book. It's a hefty volume, Radical Reform, Islamic Ethics and Liberation. Reform. When people hear that word, some may be thinking, finally. And some people may be saying, never. What is it about reform that gets people so worked up?
Many reasons. First, from within the Muslim world or the Muslim majority countries and the Muslim communities, there is a lack of understanding even of the concept of reform and thinking that it's coming from outside the Islamic tradition. Why I'm trying to show in this book, but also in the previous books, is that reform is intrinsically rooted in the Islamic tradition, because we have means and we have understanding that are promoting the idea that in order to be faithful to the Islamic principles, we really have to understand the world, the context, the environment, to be able to implement the principles in a new way when the environment is changing. So there are many dimensions. When, for example, the first scholars was talking about maslaha, which is the public interest, of course they were thinking, yes, we have the principles, but we need to go to a reform process from where the people are to what we want to achieve with them at the individual level, the social level, the collective and international level even. So reform, the two main words that I'm using in the word is tajdeed, which is to renew our understandings of Islam, and also islah, which is to reform, to come back to a sound form for our society or even our personal spiritual state. So it is not at all reforming Islam. It's reforming our understandings, our interpretations of the principles. So there is no way for me, and this should be clear from the very beginning, to change the Quran or to change the prophetic tradition, because many Muslims are criticizing the concept without exactly understanding what it means.
Why the word radical? I mean, reform throws up a red flag as it is, but radical reform. Why radical?
What I'm proposing here is, I have been working on the field of fiqh, Islamic law and jurisprudence, for more than 20 years, and advocating the fact that we have to go through ijtihad, the critical reasoning of the text when the text is open for interpretation and when the text is silent, the texts in fact, meaning the Quran and the prophetic tradition. So and then at one point I reached a limit, saying, what is the problem here? Why are we always talking about reform but we don't come with constructive, consistent and efficient answers for our problems today? We are very much on the defensive. So I came to something which is, we need to go back to the sources, and this is why it's a book on usul al-fiqh, the fundamentals of law and jurisprudence, the sources. And here we really need to go through a radical reform by saying from the very beginning, our sources are not only textual. Our sources are all also the universe, the world, the men, the societies that we have, all the sciences. So this is one. And the radical reform also, the consequence of this is really a shift in the center of gravity of authority in Islam. So we need the Muslim scholars, and we need people knowing the text, and we need specialization on this. But we also need people being able to tell us about the world, about the sciences, about medicine, about economy, and to come with them together and to produce the Islamic applied ethics that we need. So it's quite a radical reform in the consequences, but also in the vision. Shatibi, when he was speaking about usul al-fiqh, he was saying it's the philosophy of Islam, and in fact it's the concept of life, it's the way you look at the world. So I think that this is where we have to come back.
Recently you spoke to a cheering crowd at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education building at the University of Toronto, and you spoke about a hadith which says that at the head of every century there's going to be a reformer or someone yujaddidu laha dinaha. So some sort of reformer for this ummah who will reform or renew the religion for the ummah. How do you understand the reformer here? Is it an individual or a group of people, or how?
You know, the classical understanding coming from the scholars was one scholar. So man yujaddidu, man was, yes, someone will come and he will. And I think that man could be singular and could be plural. And I really think it's not one. I would say, yes, sometimes in our history it was a great scholar. You know, for example, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was understood as Hujjat al-Islam. So this was, and it's true that he came with something which is shifting the Muslim understanding and deepening it. I would say that today, or even in the past, I'm much more convinced that it's a movement of thought. It's something which is coming from within the community, and sometimes some new ideas are building, and some scholars together could come and do that. So I would prefer, because I think that this is the reality of it, that our historical realities, experiences are pushing us and some scholars to come to, okay, we now need something which is a next step, which is a better understanding, which is a new interpretation. So I would see it like this, and it's also very important for me to say this, because I don't like something in the Muslim community sometimes is idealizing someone or a sheikh. This is my sheikh and this is the only one I'm going to follow. We have a problem with authority and following. We have a problem with critical thinking. We should understand that, okay, there could be a scholar that you like, but there are many others that you should respect and listen to.
Fantastic. Well, when we think about critical thinking and renewal of the faith, we think of ijtihad or independent reasoning. When we come back right after the break, we will discuss precisely that.